Welcome to the Self-Study Creating Your Development Plan webinar, part 1 of our accreditation series. My name is Marissa Gallegos. I am part of the accreditation team here at NAFCC. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. The goal of this webinar is to explain in more detail how to use your Benchmarks to Quality book and how that will help you to prepare for your application and your observation. And it will also give you some ideas on how to show off all the hard work that you'll be doing through the self-study phase of accreditation. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone can hear and see the screen okay. If this is your first time, you'll see that you have a question box where you can go ahead and write your questions in. So if everyone wants to use that question box right now to go ahead and put your name and where you're from, that will give me a good sense of whether or not you can hear me or not, and if you can see the screen. And then that also gives those who are new and here for the first time a chance to play around with the tools and make sure that they know that I can see and hear you as well. Well, I can hear you as well through those questions. Okay, perfect. I got some answers coming in. I got some providers from Chicago, Connecticut, New York, Alabama. Hello to everybody. Great. So I want to go ahead and get started right away because I know your time is valuable and I want to go ahead and get through as much information in this hour as I can. So just like I mentioned, if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and use that question box and I will answer your questions as they arise. And then there will also be other chances where I'll have a slide for you to ask questions if you want to hold off and wait till those, or you can go ahead and write them as we get to slides. And if you have a specific question on that slide, you're welcome to go ahead and comment anything if you have suggestions, advice, or if you have a question. Okay, we got some people from, let's see, Moore, Illinois, Arkansas, Florida, DC. Perfect. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so to help us to make it through our goal of helping you to understand how to use your benchmarks to quality and to prepare for your application and observation, we will be covering the following, which you see here on the screen. First, we will talk through, or we'll walk through, the Benchmarks to Quality book, which will take up the majority of the time of this webinar. As we talk about the Benchmarks to Quality, it is important to understand the difference between standards and processes, so we will dive into what the difference between those two are. One of the most important processes is training, so we're going to cover that in detail since that's a very popular question that providers have and something that they worry about, so we'll cover all of that. And then though this is not a requirement for NAFCC accreditation, we'll also talk about how to begin creating a professional portfolio if you haven't started one already. We hope that you take pride in all the hard work you'll be doing through your accreditation. So we will take a moment to give you some ideas on how to show off your amazing program through a professional portfolio if you haven't started one already. Finally, we will briefly cover the rest of the webinar series that we hope you will attend to learn more about each of the steps of accreditation, since all the information that we have about accreditation, we can't just cover in one webinar. We've created a series so you can get all the information that you need so you feel confident for your accreditation experience. If you participated in our self-study Q&A that we held on the 6th of this month or in previous months, you'll remember that we spoke briefly about the Benchmarks to Quality Spiral Bound book. As a review, the Benchmarks to Quality divides all of the quality standards into 4 levels. Level 1 being the easiest of the standards to complete, and level 4 being the most difficult. Basically, the Benchmarks to Quality is your workbook that will help you make sure that you know and understand all of the standards required for accreditation. It will help you to measure your progress as you work on each standard. It will also lay out for you the process that you will need to complete to prepare for your application and observation. For the majority of this webinar, I'll go through the pages of this book and explain how to use it. That way you feel prepared for each step of the accreditation process and you understand fully the standards and how to meet them. You may be wondering if it's really necessary to go through the whole Benchmarks to Quality book, and we suggest and recommend that you fully take advantage of this tool. As mentioned before, it will take you step by step through the standards and processes from easiest to hardest, and will help you make a plan on how to implement each of them. Before the Benchmarks to Quality was created, many providers felt overwhelmed when starting self-study, and when they received over 200 and now almost 300 quality standards, they just didn't know where to start. It was a little overwhelming. So NAFCC created this book in hopes that it would help providers divide the work into manageable pieces, and so that you wouldn't feel as stressed out when you see that you have to implement 300 standards into your program. Okay, so before we dive into the book and talk about how to use it, I want to take a moment to define what a standard is versus what a process is, since you'll be working on both of them while you're reading the Benchmarks to Quality book. The NAFCC standards are research and expert-based practices that will be the foundation of your high-level quality family child care program. Processes are actions you will take to improve your professionalism and prepare for your NAFCC application, observation, and help you maintain your accreditation once you have received it. These tend to be a little confusing and sometimes sound the same, so we are going to cover those in separate slides. First, we'll cover all of the standards, and then we'll cover what processes are. Okay, so the NAFCC standards, excuse me, the NAFCC standards are practices or habits that you will need to implement into your program to become accredited. They have been shown through peer-reviewed research to be the best in child care practices. The NAFCC standards are divided into 5 content areas: relationships, the environment, developmental learning activities, safety and health, and professional and business practices. Some examples of our quality standards are listed here. I'll just read them through them. Example of a relationship standard would be the provider recognizes signs of stress in children's behavior and responds with appropriate stress-reducing activities. An example of an environmental standard would be the arrangement of the home and the use of space are balanced to meet the needs of both the child care program and the provider's family. And then an example of safety and health standard, infants under the age of 1 are placed on their backs for sleeping. As you can see, some of the standards are very straightforward and clear, such as standard 4.35 in safety and health, that infants are to sleep on their backs, while others can be broader. Many providers get confused when they're given a broad standard and often call into the office to ask what exactly they need to do to pass the standard, and the answer is that there are many good ways that you can meet a standard. And what I mean by that, to explain that a little bit better, I want to go ahead and show you what I mean by doing a little game with you guys. So using your question boxes, go ahead and answer this following question. How do you personally know when a child in your program is stressed? Go ahead and take a moment to write down your answers in the question box, and I'll go ahead and read your answers. Again, if you didn't hear the question is, how do you know that the children in your program are stressed? Okay, Karen and Makisha say crying. Jenny or Janai, she says body language, vocalization, facial expressions. April says crying. Maureen says crying, laying on the floor. Cindy says showing emotions. Maureen says they aren't eating. Renita says fighting. Deborah says facial expressions getting quiet. Okay, perfect. Those are some great answers. So now I want you to answer this question. What do you personally do in your program to help with that specific stressor that you mentioned? Go ahead and write those answers down and I'll read those off. Oh, oops. Joanne says she switches activities, does an extra activity. Karen says holds the baby, rubs their back. Maureen says she talks to her children, offers water, painting, holds the child. Eva says being calm, talking to the child and soothing them. Cindy says emotional activities. Renita says she uses music to relax her children. Karen says sings. Barbara says rub their back, change position. Makisha plays music. Jenny says ask them how they're feeling, vocalize their feelings. April says she talks to them, holds them. Maureen says redirection. Joanne says redirection. Astic says showing pictures of their parents. I like that idea. Eva says outdoor time. Deborah says she notices their facial expression and then asks or tells them, your face tells me that you are angry or sad, and she fills in the blank. That's a great one. All right, so I'm getting lots of answers, and these are all really great ways that you can help your children with their stressors. So as you can see, There are many types of stressors and many types of coping mechanisms to deal with those stressful situations that children are bound to have. Each of these examples and solutions you all came up with would qualify as meeting this standard. So as you can see, there is no one answer that will fit all situations. So many of these standards are left up to you to determine what is best for you, your program, and the children you take care of. I had a couple more answers come in, so I just want to share them since you all are participating amazingly. Barbara said nature sounds. Avonda says walks over and gets down on to the child's level and hugs them, helps in ways she can. Deborah says they talk about the feelings, what they can do to help. Catherine says hugs and talks. Barbara says calming bottles. And then Alexis says try to find something they're interested in and play a song they like. Alrighty, thank you for participating, and I hope through this activity you can see how with some of these standards you'll just kind of have to ponder about them and think about them, and the answer that Alexis gives and the ways that she handles these stressors are going to be different from the way Barbara or Deborah meets this standard. So I hope that makes sense. If there's any questions on what I'm trying to explain on how there's many ways, good ways to meet the standards, please let me know. Okay, so let's open up your benchmarks to quality book. If you happen to have it in front of you, I would recommend opening it. That way you can see. If you don't have it with you, I will be showing the pages here on the PowerPoint. So if you open up to page 12, you will see a very brief overview of the numbered standards, which level they're placed in, and whether or not is a required standard to meet. When you are eventually observed, you will need to meet the required standards 100%. So all of them that have required standard written in the comments, you must ensure that you're meeting those standards 100%. All of the other standards that don't have a comment that says required standard on them, you will need to meet at least 90% complete. Pages 12 through 18 will go through all of the standards numerically, showing what level they're in, and then letting you know if it's a required standard or not. Starting on page 23, you will see that the standards are now listed according to level and content area. So for example, page 23 starts the level 1 standards, starting with relationship standards. You will start here and work through each standard as such. Let me grab my pen, that way I can show you too. Okay, so for example, first you'll just start off by reading the standard. 1.1 says the provider cares about, respects, and is committed to helping each child develop to his or her full potential. Then you'll think to yourself whether you meet that standard or not. If you feel that your standard is not being met to the best that you think it can, you're going to go ahead and mark this box that says NM, which stands for not met. If you feel that you're fully meeting the standard, then you'll go ahead and check the fully met box. Then you will write the date you made that decision and any thoughts of how you can improve on the standard if you happen to put not met. So for example, for this particular standard, if you put not met in the comments, you might write, I put not met because I care about and respect all the children in my program except for Jimmy, because Jimmy's really active and hard to control. Sometimes I raise my voice with him more than I should, and I just don't always enjoy his company. So I want to work on that relationship with him. At this point, you can then decide whether you'd like to keep working through each of the following standards, or you can focus your energy on just working on that one standard for a while until you feel you have met it. What I will usually recommend to providers is that they just do a quick run through all of the standards. So go ahead, read 1.2, say, oh no, you know what, I'm not meeting that. 1.3, yes, I'm meeting that. 1.5, yes, I'm meeting that. And just go quickly through and mark them all. Either by level, or you can go through all the levels, and then after you mark them down and written your notes, then go back and start working on them one by one. That's usually what I recommend to providers, and providers have told me that that's the method that they like. But if you're more detailed oriented and want to stick with just one at a time, then I would recommend just going one by one. It might make the process a little bit longer, but either way you choose and prefer to use this book, you're welcome to use it. Just know that the NM means not met, FM means fully met, and then you have space to write notes. And then even if you do that and then you want to retry again, we offer this second column so you have more room for notes. Maureen is asking, can we use these notes during the interview? Yes. This is a great place to go ahead and write your notes. So during the interview portion of the observation, if the observer says, you know what, I really just didn't see that you were meeting standard 1.1, then that's when you can pull out your book and you say, you know what, I was struggling with that, but here's the notes I wrote down, here's how I improved, and then you can kind of show how you've been working on that and then maybe convince the observer that maybe you were meeting that one. Just so you know, this one is almost always met, so you wouldn't need to worry about that one. All of you providers are very good with children, but just as an example, yes, that's a great question, Maureen. You can definitely have the binder or the benchmarks to quality book with you, so during your interview, if there's any question about any standards that she didn't observe, you can show them your notes and let them know your knowledge of those standards. Okay, Jenny or Janai Reber asks, is there a resource describing the reason behind the standards and the research used to form them? In the front of the benchmarks to quality book, the first 12 pages, there is actually a background and a little bit of research, the history about how we found those quality standards. Just as a little bit of knowledge, we explain this in a different webinar. We have a webinar that we talk specifically about standards and most missed standards, and we cover the history a little bit. But just so you know, we do have an accreditation council that reviews the standards quite frequently. And so, as you can see, even here on the benchmark, the last time they updated was in 2017, and they're actually updating them right now. Again, that's something that some of us help with here in the office, but it's mostly the accreditation council. They are experts in the field of family child care. They get together with different universities and study the best practices based off of peer review studies and research, and that's how they come up with these standards, and they're often reviewed and changed, so they're the most relevant and in with the time, being accurate for you and your family child care home to be high quality and relevant. So that's a great question. But yes, if you're looking for a little bit more information about the history of how the standards all got started and what the processes of that is, check the first few pages of the benchmarks to quality book. Karen says, are they required to tell us what standard they're talking about so that we can give a better answer? Yes. So during your observation visit, they will be at your home for about 4.5 hours just observing. They won't say anything. They'll just watch you, watch your program, just kind of be a fly on the wall. And then for the next hour, hour and a half, they'll sit with you and have an interview with you and kind of go over what they didn't see or maybe what they didn't observe. And there are some standards that are just harder to observe, so I wouldn't be nervous about the interview. It's just a time for her to say, you know what, I didn't see that. Maybe it's just because I didn't catch it, or there were so many other standards I was trying to look for. Tell me how you meet that standard. And so if you can't think of it off the top of your head, that's when you can have your benchmarks to quality book out to remind yourself, oh yeah, I do know that standard. I was working on that one, and this is how I do it. But yeah, the observers are great. They're trained to help you understand the standards. So that's not something I would be worried about. And you definitely won't be worried about it if you go through this benchmarks book and take good notes. Maureen says, do we know how many standards of the non-mandatory represent 10%? Yes, it's in the benchmarks to quality book. I think it's on page 4. Let me double check because I can't remember. Yes, there are 73 standards that are starred standards or mandatory standards. The non-mandatory standards would be all the rest. And I know it's over 300. I think it's 310. But I know there's been a couple additions, so I might be off. But I think the benchmarks to quality book says 310 on page 4. But so I guess that's about, yeah, so you just want to make sure that those 73, is that what I said? 73 of the starred standards are for sure met. And then the other, what would it be? 237, did I do my math right? Of those are met at 90%. So Maureen says around 20. That sounds right. I'm not good at math right off the top of my head. I'd have to pull out a calculator, but Yeah, that kind of sounds about right. So you have, yeah, you have a little bit of wiggle room for ones that whether or not you just personally feel like, no, I don't want to do that, or if you made a mistake and didn't meet one of the standards, you have some wiggle room to meet those. All right, before I move on to the next slide, are there any questions about these kinds of pages? Let me erase my drawings. Cindy asks, the only way to know the STAR standard is by getting the benchmark. It will show you in the benchmark. Let me go back. So in the benchmark, you will see, there's my pen. There's this tiny little asterisk that will show you if it's a STAR standard, or if you go back to the other pages we were looking at, it'll tell you if it's a required standard. So if you have the benchmarks, that's a really easy way to see it. If you don't have a benchmarks book, you can also visit our website. On our front page, there's a link to the quality standards listed numerically, and those will also have asterisks next to the ones that are STAR standards that are required ones to meet. And then if you need help in locating that, I can show everyone at the end of this webinar how to access that if anyone wants to see that and is not sure how to access that. So this slide is just gonna show you where each level starts and ends. So on page 23, that's where you'll start level 1, page 42, level 2, page 55, level 3, page 70, level 4. So as you can see, the majority of the book is filled with these types of pages where you're just gonna self-evaluate, not met, fully met, and write your notes and about the progress you're making or about what you wanna do to better meet those standards. So before we move on, are there any questions in regards to these types of pages? Alrighty, so the only other thing that's really in your benchmarks to quality book are the provider profile sheet that starts on page 84 and the provider profile recap sheet, which is on page 101 and 102. These are two tools that are mostly used by mentors. If you have a mentor that's helping you, or if you like to use the benchmark book over time, it's a great way to score yourself over time, or if you like to have it just on one chart, a little bit smaller, these are two good tools that you can have. So this first one, as you can see, it just has the standard, the numbered standard, and then whether or not it was fully met or not met in the date you tried it. So if you wanted to score yourself, I don't know, every month, this might be a good tool to use. So like I said, this is mostly used for mentors because they know a little bit better all the numbers and what those numbers mean. But you're welcome to use this tool as well. And then this provider profile recap sheet, this is just a more visual way so you can see all of the standards. So this is a good page for, I think it was, yeah, Maureen who was asking which of how many STAR standards are in each. So if you look here, it'll tell you level 1, there's 45 STAR standards. And then you can see how many of the standards there are in that level and how many process requirements there are. And then you can do over time, you can have a buddy score you or your mentor score you on how well you're doing that, and then you can just go over time and see how well you're doing if you kind of like to have a grade book type of thing to see your progress. So you don't have to use these, but it's just a nice tool if you have a mentor or if you're working with a buddy and you want to kind of see your progress over time. Okay, so if there are no more questions about standards and how to use those pages in the book, we're going to move on to processes. So processes are actions that you will take to improve your professionalism and prepare for your NAFCC application, observation, and help you maintain your accreditation once you've received it. So as opposed to standards, which tend to be broad, these are very specific actions that you will need to take. So for example, have a high school diploma or a GED. It's a very specific requirement or process that you need to complete. And then the other example would be design an improvement plan so that you can make all the standards that you mark not met be fully met. That's a specific process that you would need to fill out. Alexis says in my book it said 42 starred standards. Are you talking about on the provider profile recap sheet, or you may or may not have a newer or older version than the one I'm looking at, so there might be a little bit of discrepancy in numbers if anyone sees any numbers that are different, because we do have a few versions of the book. We edit it on page 101. I'm trying to see where you're looking at. Oh, on level 1, you're saying it says 42. I'm guessing you probably have an older version of the book. I'm not sure. And so maybe that's why it's different, because there has been a couple standards that have been added. But if there are little tiny discrepancies in numbers like that, don't stress out too much about that, but it gives you a good idea of what they are. We are currently working on editing the benchmark books for little discrepancies like that. So I apologize if you have a newer, older version and there's some number discrepancies, but you'll get a good idea of approximately how many there are if it's an older version. And then if you're worried about it, you can always go through, and on the first pages 12 through 18, that's where you can see for sure all of the required standards. Those are all commented on there correctly, so you can check all those there too. Alrighty, so on pages 19 through 22, that's where you're going to find the list of each of the processes and their levels. And then you have a comment box where you can leave notes. So same process, you'll just go through all of these, make sure that they're all met. And I like these process pages because this is more of like the paperwork stuff that you're going to need for your accreditation application. So these are good requirements to go over to make sure that you're meeting all these, because all of these you'll need to have done and need to submit for your accreditation application. So I want to take the majority of the rest of the time to talk about one of the specific processes that becomes really important to your application later on, which are training hours. The benchmarks to quality will divide it up into 4 processes, number 5, 10, 16, and 28. For your initial application, you will need to submit a total of 120 training hours. So each of these processes divides the training up into 30-hour chunks, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming when you're trying to get all these hours together. These processes are the ones that will most likely take up the most of your time, and the ones that also need the most planning and most likely the most funds to take care of. So I want to take the time to talk about training. That way you understand how you can get these 120 hours and make a good plan, so it's not something that's stressing you out. Maureen is asking, does the professional development plan need to be in the binder? And if so, should it cover your plan for the next 3 years for education and training? So most of your professional development plan is actually the benchmarks to quality. When you write all those notes in on those pages, that is part of your plan. If there's anything else that you write in your plan, like I'm going to do 1 training every 2 weeks or something like that, then yeah, you would want to write those down and stick them in your binder. So if the observer happens to ask you, like, hey, tell me how your self-study process went and such, then you could have that plan there. Your specific plan you won't need to submit at the time of your application, but it's good to have that for yourself to make sure that you're planning things accordingly and having those plans to meet the processes and to meet the quality standards. So yes, I would keep those in your binder. Alrighty, so for training hours, what I have listed here on the screen are the types of trainings that you can submit. So any workshop that you have taken that is 2 hours or less, you can go ahead and submit those up to 28 hours. Any training sessions that are longer than 2 hours, you can submit an unlimited amount of those towards your 120 training hours. Any classes or workshops taught by you up to 18 hours, you can submit. You can submit degree hours, college courses, continuing education units, or CEUs, and the initial family child care development associate. I have a couple questions coming in. Just so you know, we'll go through each of these one by one in more description. So if you have any questions related to any specific one of those, I might hold off your question until we get to that section, but let me just see what questions have come in. So Renate asks, what happens if you send in your reaccreditation application and you don't have enough CEUs? Do you have time to catch up? So for those who are reaccrediting, there is a little bit different requirement. Reaccreditation application needs to submit only 90 hours, but 45 of those 90 hours need to be continuing education units. So if you submit an application, Renate, and you don't have enough CEUs, you'll get a letter or an email or a phone call from us letting you know how many more CEU hours you need. And yes, you'll have time to get those. However, you want to make sure that you submit your reaccreditation application a few months before your expiration date, to make sure that if anything like that happens, we don't want your accreditation to lapse. So we always recommend that you submit your reaccreditation application 5 or 6 months before your expiration date. That way it doesn't lapse, because there are some providers who do receive funding before being accredited, and so if it lapses, sometimes your state doesn't want to fund you, and we don't want you to get in that situation or that problem. So submit it as early as you can, or if you're confused or worried that you don't have enough CEU hours, you can always send a notice to one of us here at the office, and we'll have our contact information at the end of this webinar. You can send us your transcripts and your certificates, and we can count them for you and let you know where you're standing if you're worried that you don't have enough. And that goes for everyone else as well. At the time of your application, if you submit what you think is 120 hours and there's not enough, or if you're not sure if all the hours that you have are going to count, you can submit it to one of us and we'll count it for you to let you know how you're doing and how many more you need. But hopefully after I explain all of these types of trainings, it'll be something that you'll be able to do on your own and feel confident about whether or not you have those hours. So I hope that answers your question, Renate. If not, let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to all of these. So in the 120 training, oh, sorry, Renate saying, faxed my training in a few weeks ago, but I've not heard yet. At the end of the webinar, I'll have my contact information. Go ahead and send it directly to me, because I know that we've gone through all the faxes as of today. So it might be that one of our accreditation members is working on it still, or it was lost. But if it's been a couple weeks, it only takes us a couple days to get back to you. So go ahead and send it directly to me and I can check that for you. Okay, so for the 7 core competencies, of your 120 training hours, you must include at least 12 hours of at least 5 of these core competencies. The 7 core competencies that we look for are listed here: relationships, interactions, and guidance, child growth and development, learning environments and curriculum, health, safety, nutrition, assessments and screening, special needs and inclusion, and professional and business practices. Now, this might start to sound a little overwhelming, but I can assure you that it isn't very difficult to meet these competencies. But I do want you to take a moment to go through, these when you're picking trainings, to make sure that you're getting a good balance. Sometimes we tend to have preferences and we really like those classes on health and safety, or we really like the relationship classes. And then if you look and you have over 70 hours of just relationship classes, we want to make sure that you're well-rounded and you're getting trainings in all of these core competencies, or at least that you're dabbling in all of them. So just make sure that when you're taking trainings that you have all of these, or at least 5 of them, for first accreditation purposes. For reaccrediting purposes, you do need all 7. But for first timers, you need just at least 5. Yes, Avanda, 12 hours in each of the 5 areas. 12 hours and at least 5 of them. So you can pick whichever 5 you want. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and dive into each of the trainings, just so you can understand it a little bit better. So trainings that are less than 2 hours is pretty self-explanatory. You're allowed to submit up to 28 hours of any trainings that lasted any amount less than 2 hours. So for example, if you took an hour workshop about nutrition from your state and they give you a certificate, that counts as training towards your 120 hours. So any certificates or transcripts that you get from your state or from whatever trainings you take, you want to keep those because you do have to submit certificates or transcripts in order for us to count those trainings. Barbara says, I plan to apply for a group daycare license in the near future. How will that affect my accreditation? Where are you from, Barbara? As long as your state considers group daycare to be family child care, then you should be fine. And then as long as you meet our other eligibility requirements, you should be good. I know that there's some states that consider group daycare to be to not be family child care, but other states that do. So you'll just have to check with what your state says. Illinois, okay, you'll be fine then, Barbara. I know Illinois, your group care is totally fine. Yep, as long as you're in your home and meeting those license requirements for family child care, you'll be fine. Joanne says New York. I can't remember New York off the top of my head, but I think you're fine too. Yes, I'm actually working on a project right now trying to get all that information together because that's a very popular question and I don't always know the answer. But yes, Illinois I know for sure, and New York I think you're totally fine too. Alrighty, so we talked about, oh, did I skip one? Okay, so there's also trainings for more than 2 hours. If you take a training or a class that's over 2 hours and receive a certificate or proof of attendance, you can count that towards your 120 hours, and those hours are unlimited. You can submit as many of those as you want. Trainings taught by you. You can also submit hours from classes that you yourself have taught. We do limit these to 18 hours, and you can only submit each class you teach once. If you decided to submit any of these hours, you'll want to submit a description of the class you taught with the date and time you taught it, and then some sort of proof that someone attended, such as a sign-in sheet. That way we can verify that you actually did teach a class and that you're not just making up that you taught a nutrition class so you get an extra 18 hours for NAFCC accreditation. So as with all these hours, you always want to make sure that you're submitting a certificate, a transcript, some sort of proof of attendance. Okay, you can also submit college degrees that you've earned as hours towards your accreditation. A master's in early childhood education, child development, or a related field from an accredited college or university can be submitted for up to 45% of your required training hours, which equals 54 hours. A bachelor's in early childhood education, child development, or related field will be counted towards 35% of your training hours, which ends up being 42 hours. The associates in early childhood education, child development, or another related field can be submitted for up to 25%, which ends up being 30 hours, or the bachelor's unrelated. So if you have a degree like in accounting or law or something different than family child care, we still do count those hours, and we count it up to 15% of your required training hours, which ends up equaling 18 training hours. If you are reaccrediting provider, these numbers will be a little bit different. These hours are for first-time accrediting providers. So if you are reaccrediting, you can check our training detail on our website, and the hours will be a little bit different because we count them by percentage. So 45% for masters, 35 for bachelors, 25 for associates, and 15 for bachelors. So the hours end up being a little bit different since you only have to have 90 hours. Renate says, does the training leading up to the associates count? Yes, we're going to get right into that on the next slide because it depends. That's how I'll answer that. It depends, but I'll explain that in just a minute. Maureen says, for reaccreditation, do the hours on teaching a class only include the hours that the class takes place, or does it include your prep time also? You can include your prep time, unless, well, the prep time, like your setup time. So if it takes you an hour, like if it takes you half an hour to set up the class and then another 20 minutes to take down, you can count that. That's fine. But like if you're talking about, oh, it took me 5 weeks to create the class, no, we can't count the research time. Not the prep time, just the actual teaching time. Okay, so to get to Renate's question, college courses can also be submitted. Semester courses are 15 hours. for each unit class. Sorry, let me say that again. Each unit is worth 15 hours in a semester course. So for example, if you took a 1-unit class, it would be 15 hours. If you took a 3-unit class, that would be a whole 45 hours. If you take a quarter semester class, those only count for 10 hours per unit. So 1 unit would be 10 hours, 2 unit 20 hours, 3 unit 30 hours. So the only thing with college courses and with all trainings except for degrees is that they can be no older than 3 years from the day you submit. So let's say you're going to submit January 1st of 2020. You wouldn't be able to submit any trainings that are older than, let's see, let me do some math, 2017. You can submit anything that's from January 2017 to January 2020. 17, 18, yeah. So you could do the 2017, 2018, and 2019, anything from any of those years, any trainings that you've gotten. And the reasoning behind that is because we want you to be taking classes that are relevant and that are based off of what's going on now in family child care. So we cannot accept a class that you took 15 years ago unless it is your degree. We will always count your degree no matter how old it is, whether you got it yesterday or you got it 20 years ago. The degrees we will always count, but any other training is only 3 years. So to answer your question, Renate, if you just got your associate's degree, then yes, we would be able to count the last 2 years of classes that you took to get to that associate's degree, since it's been younger than 3 years. And then for us to be able to count your college classes, make sure that you submit a copy of your transcript. It doesn't need to be an official transcript. So Jenny asked, what about an associate's degree that isn't specifically related to early childhood? We don't count associates, let me go back. We don't count associate's degrees that are unrelated, only associates that are related. But if you just recently got your associates within the past 3 years, if you had any classes that were related to the core competencies that we listed a few slides ago, we'll count those classes. So if you took, I don't know, an infant development course, we would go a 3-unit child development course. We would count that for 45 training hours, but we can't count just the associate's degree that isn't related to early childhood. And that's just because typically those associate's degrees, they just don't have a lot that's related. It's basic fundamental things that you're learning, and so we just can't count them because there's not enough hours going towards your professional development for NAFCC accreditation. Okay, so the other kind of training that you can submit, they're called CEUs, which is continuing education units. What CEU means, continuing education unit means, is that the class that you take that offers them is either an accredited institution or it's taught by an accredited or certified person. So obviously a college course, those are continuing education units that you receive, or a degree, those are composed of continuing education units. But when you go online to take trainings or you go out to the public to take trainings, you can ask them if they offer CEUs, or on the websites, it'll always let you know if there are CEUs available, and those will count towards CEU hours. These aren't as important right now with the first-time accrediting providers, but for re-accrediting providers, you do need to have at least 45 of these types of hours. And if you are wanting to get good high-quality training, you always want to look for these CEU, these continuing education units, because you know that they're being taught by an accredited or certified person. So I just put a little math here because sometimes it gets a little confusing. In the college world, in the continuing education unit world, they always will write it as a decimal as opposed to a whole number. So if you see on your form and it says 0.1 unit, it will actually translate to 1 CEU hour. If you see a 1 CEU, 1 continuing education unit, that will add up to 10 hours. If that gets confusing or you forget about that, I wouldn't stress out too much about it, because all of your certificates will say something along the lines of, this certificate was for this training that was worth 1 CEU or 10 regular hours. It'll always translate it for you. And then if you happen to have a certificate that doesn't translate it for you and you're confused, you can always submit it to us and we'll let you know. Okay, got a couple questions coming in. Jenny or Janai, I'm sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She says, the bachelor's degree I'm pursuing is a multidisciplinary degree with a certificate in inquiry-based early childhood. Is that considered related or unrelated to early childhood? You could submit it, and then our Fernanda is the one in the office who does the applications and reviews them. She, if she is unsure whether it is accepted or not, she'll run it by our accreditation manager. I don't think we've ever accepted a multidisciplinary degree, bachelor's degree for for the full bachelor hours. But if you have a certificate, you could submit that in and we could probably count it for some hours, or at least for the hours that the units that you took through your university to get those. But I'm more leaning towards that they probably wouldn't count your bachelor's degree as early child care. They would count it as the bachelor's unrelated and you'd get the 18 hours. But I wouldn't make the final call on that, but just from what I've heard and seen before, I think you'd probably get 18 hours for the unrelated bachelor's, and then you would get whatever units you earned for that certificate on top of that, since the certificate seems to be related in early childhood. Okay, Barbara asks, can we use college coursework that is before the 3-year cutoff? So if it's 1-year-old, 2-year-old, or 3-year-old, yes, you could use it. If it's older than 3 years old, no. Only degrees. Degrees we will count infinitely for as long as, because they live forever, but college courses, they have to be within the 3 years. Okay, so we covered CEUs. Okay, the last type of training that we do accept towards ours is the CDA, the Family Child Child Development Associate. It's a credential that is awarded through the Council for Professional Recognition for those who aren't familiar, but I'm sure that most of you are. And the CDA is actually worth your whole 120 hours. So if you do happen to have a CDA or you're thinking about getting the CDA, it's a great way to get those 120 hours in one spot. The only thing that you want to make sure is that, or one thing you want to recognize, sorry, I can't talk. One thing you want to recognize is that NAFCC will only count the initial CDA. So if you have a renewal CDA, we can't count those hours. We can only count the initial CDA towards your 120 hours. Alrighty, so there are more processes than just training, but that is the most grueling and what will take up the most of your time. So I wanted to cover all that information for you. Just as a reminder, all of the processes can be found on pages 19 through 22. Are there any questions in regards to the processes or in regards to training that we didn't cover before? Okay, Renate says in her state, all training has to be verified, and some you can take for CEUs, and they are the same as the ones that are free or less expensive. Do they count? Yes, if your registry mentions that they were CEU courses, we will count them as CEUs. Just make sure that your registry says that. when you submit it in, and most of them do. Most of them will say whether it was a regular training hour or a CEU hour. So as long as your registry is showing, your transcript shows that it was a CEU hour, yes, we will count them. And then just for those who don't know, CEUs, they often cost a little bit more money just because they are from accredited institutions, but there are plenty of websites that offer free CEUs or very inexpensive CEU classes. So that would be something worth looking into. And if that is something that you are interested in, or if you're having trouble finding trainings, if at the end of this webinar you're wanting to find some more resources, I can show you on our website, on our training detail, where you can find some trainings online. Alrighty, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to move on, but of course, if you think of something, go ahead and write it in the question box. But let's see. So I do want to quickly and briefly talk about your professional portfolio. Having a professional portfolio is not a requirement for NAFCC accreditation. However, if you're going to be working on such a huge project like accreditation and self-study, implementing all of these standards and processes into your program, it's a great idea and a great time to start working on a professional portfolio if you haven't started one already. A professional portfolio is a compilation of information about your program, experiences you've had as a child care provider or a child educator, and all other data that you might have that can give a picture of what your program is. It is a chance for you to show off your program's changes over time and to highlight what you've accomplished during your time as a child care provider. It's also a great tool that you can use to show off to parents and potential clients. You can create it in whatever fashion you would like. We do have some ideas for starting a professional portfolio. You can find that information on our provider guide, pages 124 through 150, but here are some of those ideas. You may want to include a personal philosophy, written narratives, before and after photographs, samples of your children's work in your program, descriptions of your program, and anything that shows up how unique your specific program is. And because portfolios are so unique, it's hard to tell you exactly what to put in there, but these are just some ideas. And if you're looking for more ideas, like I said, you can check the provider guide, pages 124 through 150 for some more ideas. And on the next few slides, I'm going to show you a couple of samples of pages of a portfolio to give you an idea. I did get a question and I want to answer quickly. Joanne asked, can we use all certificates? I recently took classes for foster parents and received 30 hours of training. That's awesome, Joanne. Yes, when you submit your training, you'll want to submit, whether they be transcripts or certificates, you'll want to submit all those in so we can prove that you can prove to us that you've actually taken those courses. So yes, go ahead and submit with whatever certificate you have for those trainings. Alrighty, so these are just a couple of ideas that I found off of Pinterest. There's lots of ways you could go about making your portfolio. This person happened to make a binder. Here on the right, they showed an activity that they do to kind of show off what activities they do and to show off the motor skills that they're learning as they work on this specific craft. And then if it happens to be a picture of one of your children, then that makes that more special. Here on the left side, they kind of just gave a description of their day, the things that they do, what they're learning through the activities that they do, and then the kind of things that they're learning. So here on the bottom it says that they learn sequencing and they learn counting, and then they learned how to throw, how to use throwing movements and coordination and things like that. So I think that sometimes in the activities that you do, you don't realize how much you're actually helping these children to learn so many different things. And so and parents don't know that that this beanbag game is actually teaching them so many things. And so that's a way you can show off your program and say, hey, this isn't just a beanbag toss, or hey, this isn't just a balancing game, but this is helping them with their coordination, with their sequencing, with all the different things that your specific activities are helping with. And then here's another idea. So here on the right, this program likes to cook. And so they explain in their portfolio why we do cooking and the things that cooking teaches children, so they can show that off to parents or to other potential clients or to even other family child care providers. And then here on the left, they have some pictures of the different types of play that they incorporate into their program and the benefits of each of those types of play. So I don't know if there's anyone here tonight who has started a portfolio who would like to share some ideas of what they do, or if you have any questions in regards to portfolios or have any ideas you want to share. If you do, go ahead and comment in the question box. But that's really all I have to show you tonight in regards to professional portfolios. Like I mentioned, it's very personal. So if you're looking for ideas, you can check these web links that I posted. It's just Pinterest. Or you can find on other websites ideas to get a portfolio started if you're still needing some guidance on that. Alrighty, so the final thing we're going to talk about tonight is just the webinar series that we are offering here at NAFCC. So in this webinar, we have covered all the information in the benchmarks to quality, and we started to touch a little bit of the surface of what's in your provider guide, which are the loose leaf papers that are in your self-study kit. But because there is so much information in that provider guide, and we're limited on time, and we can't teach everything all in one presentation, we've created the webinar series to help cover the rest of the parts of that provider guide. So approximately every 2 weeks, there's different parts of the webinars that are presented, so you can learn more about what's covered in the provider guide in much more detail. So for example, part 2 covers the application that will be in the next 2 weeks. Part 3 covers the observation, what to expect the observation visit, and part 4 covers updates and how to maintain your accreditation. So if that is something you're interested in learning more about, you can register for our webinars at our website. And we would love to have you for all those parts so you can learn in more detail about each phase of the accreditation process. Oh, Maureen was mentioning that she started an album. She says, I have an album with pictures and descriptions of the developmental area it covers. That's awesome, Maureen. I hope you keep doing that. That sounds great. Oh, and then just a little side note. I love it when providers send in little snippets of their portfolio or pictures of what's going on in their program. That makes our day here at NAFCC when you share what's going on in your program and when you submit your updates eventually and you talk about your program with us. We love it when you submit pictures or send us emails letting us know what's going on in your program. So yeah, please keep up with the pride in your work making those portfolios, because that's something to really be proud of. So I'm glad you're doing that, Moni. Renate, I'm glad that you like the webinars. I'm glad that they're really helpful. We created them in hopes that they would be beneficial to you, since we know that accreditation can be stressful and worrisome and all of the above. And so we wanted to be able to create community and a place where you could ask your questions. So that's all I have for tonight for this webinar. I just wanted to have one more chance for you to ask your questions. We have about 3 minutes left of the webinar. So for those of you who don't have any more questions, I just want to quickly show off our information. This is the accreditation team. If you have any further questions that can't be answered tonight, or if you come up with questions later or concerns, these are the ladies that work on the accreditation team. Alicia Platt is our accreditation operations manager. Fernanda, she works on applications and updates. Marissa, that's me. I work with provider engagement and do some other projects to help you guys out with your accreditation, and I work on self-study, so those of you who are working for the first time on accreditation. And then Maria Velasco works with the observation phase of accreditation. So if you have any questions, those are our phone numbers, extensions, and our emails. And then of course we have the NAFCC Accreditation Candidates and Process page that you're welcome to join if you haven't already, where you can ask questions and find community with those who are also working on self-study or working on accreditation for the first time. And also we have providers on there who have been accredited for a while who help to mentor and answer questions. Alrighty, so for those who can't stick around for some more questions, thank you for attending, and Hope to hear from you at other webinars, and I'll stick around for the last few minutes to answer any lingering questions. Okay, let's see. I got a couple questions. I just want to make sure I get to the top. Cindy says, I'm making a book of all the NAFCC PowerPoints. May I request today's? Absolutely. I can either email it to you, Cindy, or if you're part of the Facebook page, I'll also put it on there. Whenever anyone requests, I usually just put it on the Facebook page too, but I'll write your name down so I can email it to you. And then I'll also put it on the Facebook page for anyone else who's interested in having the slides. And then, let's see. Janai Reaver says, who can I send my transcripts to for review? I would recommend either me, Marissa, or Fernanda Melchor. One of us two can check those for you. And yes, Cindy, I'll go ahead and email that to you. And Eva, I can email it to you as well. It'll most likely be tomorrow since it's late here, just so you know. Oh, and then also, I will have this recording up on our YouTube page as well as the NAFCC Accreditation Candidates in Process page by tomorrow. It usually takes all night for it to upload, but those will be up and posted as well. If you want to watch the recording later or have the PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and put those on our NAFCC page on Facebook. Yes, Cynthia Robinson, I can email it to you. Deborah, I can email it to you. Deborah, I can email it to you. Berlinda, I can email it to you. I'll probably just end up emailing it to most of you anyway, or to all of you, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Chantel says, Marissa, thank you again for the informative webinar. You're welcome. I would like an email of the slides. Yes, I can email it to you. Can a portfolio be electronic, like on an iPad? Absolutely. It's whatever you want to create to show off your work. Yes, you can go ahead and do it online or in an electronic format. You're welcome, Teresa. Marcella, I'll get you the slides. When is the application webinar? I can't remember off the top of my head. I know it's in 2 weeks' time. Let me escape out of here and I can check the website. Oh, and then just for anyone who wants to know, if you want to find out where future webinars are, just go to accreditation on the NAFCC website. Down to the third one, there's accreditation webinars. So the application is December 5th. December 5th is when that next session is. And I think there's actually a standards one before that. Yeah, November 18th, there's a Most Missed Standards webinar if you want to attend that as well. Barbara says, thank you for this great way of receiving information. If I receive my accreditation first and then my group license later, would that still be okay? So one of the requirements for NAFCC accreditation is that you have a family child care license. So as long as you still have your small group license, yes, you would be fine to do that. The only thing, Barbara, is that if you do apply and start your accreditation process, just know that the whole process takes about 5 months, 4 to 5 months. So if you're wanting to get that group license sooner than later, I would probably recommend getting that group license first and then applying for an NAFCC accreditation. But if that's not a huge priority to get the group license right away, then yeah, go ahead and do NAFCC accreditation. And then when you do switch to a group license, when the update when the update portion of your accreditation process comes along, you'll want to submit your new enrollment and your new group license. Cynthia, thank you. You're welcome. Teresa says, I've saved all the dates in my calendar, so don't forget. Awesome. And then also, if you register beforehand as well, I know you do get an email reminder, I think a day before and then an hour before. So even if you forget, you'll get those reminders in your email too. Chantel says, I'm working on getting my infant mental health endorsement. Can I use those trainings? If so, how do I classify them? Yes, you can go ahead and submit those hours. those would probably be classified. Let me go back to my PowerPoint, or I guess I can look right here. I have my notes here. I think you would end up classifying those as, I think there's in one of the categories, it's special needs. Yeah, special needs and inclusion. You could probably count it under that. Barbara says, I'm currently renewing my license. My rep recommended waiting for group. Yeah, I would probably go with that too, especially if you're wanting to submit your NAFCC accreditation right away. Yeah, you can go ahead and do NAFCC accreditation first, get that under your belt, and then work on group. And then Teresa says, how do we get credit from these webinars? Perfect. So tomorrow, always the day after a webinar, you will receive an email from us with the proof of attendance, and then it has an automated GoToWebinar certificate that will be attached to that. So you can go ahead and use that email. Just send the email back to us when you are going to submit your application. Just a copy of that email along with your application, and we'll count that as proof. Or you can use that GoToWebinar certificate that you'll receive. If you happen to need another certificate for your state registries, you can also email me back that email and request an NAFCC certificate, and I would be happy to make those for you, make it for you. Verlinda says, I registered for all the trainings. I don't hold a degree yet, but about to enroll into CDA. Would I still be able to continue this process? Yes, absolutely. So part of this whole process, the accreditation self-study process, is doing all of this work, getting your trainings in line, getting your background checks, getting your CPR first aid. So yes, you can still continue on this process with us. You just wouldn't be able to submit your application until you have those 120 training hours. Tamitha asked, do these proofs expire? Just after 3 years. So you will need to submit your trainings no later than 3 years from your submission date. So yes, it's 3 years old. But you can save that email or save the certificate that I will send you tomorrow for your records. Alrighty, I don't see any other questions coming in. If that is all the questions, I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint for a second. That way, if anyone else needed our contact information, you have it here. Or not. Go all the way. Makes me go through it all. There we go. Oh, Maureen is asking, did you see my question? Let me go back. Maybe I missed it. The last thing I see from you, Maureen, was that you love the reminders. I don't think I see any other questions from you. The only other question you had was way up at the top. If our application and training hours are complete, can we use these webinars for our requirements for reapplication? Yes. Okay, so yeah, I did find your question. So yes, you can use these webinars as hours for your re-accreditation. Yes. Was that the question you were asking about, Maureen, or did I miss one? Okay, perfect. Alrighty, well, I think those are all the questions. So unless anyone has a last minute question, here is our contact information one last time. And I hope to see you around on the Accreditation Candidates in Process Facebook page. And then, of course, if you have any questions or concerns that I wasn't able to answer tonight, go ahead and send me an email. Thank you so much for everyone who participated tonight. Have a great night, and I hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you so much, everybody.